call this meeting of City Council to order. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Williams.
I'm here.
Councilmember Barry. Councilmember Clay. Here. Councilmember Robinson.
Here.
Councilmember Siemens.
Present.
Councilmember Snipper.
Present.
Councilmember Wright.
Here.
Do any council members have any comments? Councilmember Siemens and then Councilmember Clay.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm glad to see we're getting ready to start this year's budget process. I feel that this year's council schedule for the budget includes the same problem as recent years. We compress too many discussions into too few days, which minimizes the council's influence on the final budget. Even if the council decides to continue the approach of receiving the city manager's proposed budget before we start our discussions, we can ask for it earlier in the year. I understand the city manager doesn't normally finish her proposal until the county tells us how much we'll receive in rebates and the state tells us how much we'll receive from property taxes and other revenues. I believe this is unnecessary. The vast majority of our revenues come from property taxes over which we have near complete control. Regardless of what the state projects for next year's property tax revenue, this council can, as we usually do, vary our tax rate to control the revenue amount. There's no value in waiting for the property tax projections to start our budget process. Although the rebate amount, our portion of transportation taxes, and other revenue amounts vary from year to year, the council always makes up for any shortfalls by raising property taxes or cutting services. Again, there's no value in waiting for these projections to start our budget process. I believe city taxpayers will be better served when the council finds an approach for budgeting that gives us more time for discussions and exploration of alternatives. Since we control the largest revenue source, property taxes, we don't need the city manager to wait for revenue projections before preparing the proposed budget. I feel the council will do a much better job budgeting when we spend more than a mere 2 or 3 weeks of multiple sessions a week. Our new strategic plan lays the groundwork for better budgeting. I look forward to a schedule that provides time for comprehensive budget discussions. Thank you.
Councilmember Clay.
Okay. So a couple things. I wanted to say that I really like the newsletter and all the stories in it, and I wanted to point out to folks that there's a meeting on sidewalks coming up this Thursday, February 5th, from 7 to 9 p.m., which I think is here in the, is it here in the council chambers or the Azalea room? It's here at the community center, isn't it?
It's Thursday in the Azalea room.
In the Azalea room, yeah. So, and that's terrific. And the other thing is it's February, and another month has gone by since WSSC promised to open the Sligo Creek Parkway. And so, being Monday morning, the first day of February, I called WSSC this morning and got the usual runaround. I think it's time that they give us an actual definitive date on when they're going to open it, and also I would like to know if the city manager has heard anything about at least opening the stretch between Maple and Old Carroll Road, for which from, external appearances, there doesn't really seem to be a reason to close it. There may be some reason that we don't know about, but it would be great if we could at least open that part of it.
The Public Works Director has been in contact with both WSSC and Park and Planning since that section of the roadway is under their jurisdiction. Quite honestly, there's a little bit of ping pong going on between both of them. She is still trying to get them to talk to one another and get a decision.
Okay.
Anything else?
No.
Councilmember Robinson.
I just want to say that Tacoma Junction is a mess right now, and the firehouse is in full rebuild, and the lights are out during the day or blinking red, and it's hard for school kids to get across. And I have the Chief Rakucci is studying the matter, and I hope to hear from him that we'll have some kind of resolution in the next couple of days. There might be a different kind of policy for helping kids get across, depending on whether the lights are out completely or blinking, or of course on, or whether the guys are out there with a stop and slow signs. So I acknowledge that the chief acknowledges that the intersection is a mess right now, but I'm glad to know that he's working to try to resolve it in some way. And I think that's all.
Councilmember Wright.
Thank you, Mayor. First, just wanted to say a thank you to the city staff for pestering WSSC to do something, which was fill in the crater that sinkhole basically that appeared in Carroll Avenue, 70001 Carroll Avenue. There was basically a hole so big that they had to put a traffic cone in it so that a car wouldn't lose an entire tire or axle into it.
I drove through that.
Oh, you did? Is
Yeah.
your car alive?
It squeaks louder now.
So, fortunately, WSSC responded pretty quickly and came and filled in the hole with a short-term patch. So I thank the city staff for really getting on them and resolving that issue. I had a quick question. I know we're working on getting the nuclear-free zone signs back up, and I just wanted to check. My understanding last we heard was that we couldn't make them in-house, and we were looking at finding someone outside to do it, and I just wanted to check to see if we had any additional information about that.
Sure. As I had mentioned, I guess, a couple weeks ago, we needed to go out and get pricing, and then they would have to be custom made, and I think the Public Works Director had estimated about 8 weeks. So we still got about 6 weeks to go. She has been in touch with about 2 vendors, is in the process of getting some pricing before we can award a contract to someone. So I still think we're probably looking about another 6 weeks.
Great, thank you. And then lastly, I just wanted to follow up on our session last week about the license plate scanner. I noticed that someone left us this guide from the Constitution Project on the dais here. I was reading up on this online with some material from the Constitution Project today, and 2 things occurred to me after reading that. One is I definitely think we need to map out a process that engages the public more fully in this debate. We had a work session, but maybe we can have, after we get a briefing from the city attorney about some of the legal issues, I think we should figure out a way to have an open session where we can more fully engage the public on the issues. And then the second thing is the area of biggest concern to me is around the retention of data, and 2 things associated with that. One is that if we're going to go back and look at that data based on thinking that someone did something and that could be used as evidence against them, there should be some sort of probable cause associated with that. And perhaps even you need to get like you would get with a search warrant, you need to get some ruling to say, yes, this meets the standard of probable cause, and then we're going to go look to see if this car was found in the data at a certain place. And then the second thing is very serious concern about retaining the data for anything more than a couple weeks, mainly because that makes us available, then it makes it available and can be requested pretty clearly under the U.S. Patriot Act. The big concern to me about that is the U.S. Patriot Act has a great deal of secrecy associated with it, and we'd have no idea why they were requesting the data, and that just is a little scary to me. So those are as I've done a little research, I just want to share those thoughts with my council colleagues and the public.
I'd just like to add my voice to Councilmember Clay's that I noticed in particular with this issue of the newsletter that it just seemed more interesting to me and better layout, and I was tempted to comment myself, so I'll just add to hers and say that's 2 voices saying it was a good one. And then 2 things that I just wanted to note with some concern and sadness. One, as I'm sure most people know, County Councilmember Don Praisner died last week, and I just wanted to make sure that people know that the viewing is tomorrow at the Heinz Rinaldi Funeral Home at 11800 New Hampshire Avenue. That's Tuesday, February 3rd from 2 to 4 and 6 to 8. And the service is going to be at St. John the Baptist Catholic Church at 12319 New Hampshire Avenue the following day, Wednesday the 4th at 10 a.m. And I know we're all thinking a lot about his family and children, especially after they lost their mother, his predecessor on the council, less than a year ago. And I also wanted to note that many people in the city know and have worked with Dan Parr, who was Councilmember Tom Perez's chief of staff and confidential aide when Mr. Perez was our county council member. And I wanted to let folks know that he underwent an operation today at the Fred Hutchinson Cancer Research Center in Seattle. This was to remove his spleen because he's been in line for a bone marrow transplant, and they had to do this before they could do that. So I know that he and his family are also in our thoughts as they are in Seattle dealing with that very serious situation. Any further council comments? Okay, additional agenda items. There are none, and an agenda scheduling update. I'll just remind folks that next Monday, February 9th, we have a work session discussion of our strategic plan and council priorities. The following week, our meeting is on Tuesday, the 17th, and among other items, we will have a discussion of the council grants program. And the following Monday, February 23rd, we will have public hearings on proposed charter amendments. And that gets us to the month of March. The next item is adoption of minutes for January 5th. Would somebody like to move that adoption?
Second.
Moved by Councilmember Snipper, seconded by Councilmember Wright. Are there any comments on the minutes? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Ayes have it. The next item is public comment period, when any member of the public may comment on anything that is either not on our agenda or on our work session agenda item. So the floor is open for any comments on anything, and if you please identify yourself and keep your comments to 3 minutes, we'd appreciate it. Thanks.
Yeah, my name's Pat Lovelace, 7620 Maple Avenue, Tacoma Park, Maryland, Ward 4. I hope everybody's glad that we got a new president now, and we finally don't have to say we're going to get George Bush out, we're going to impeach Bush, we're going to do that because the voters have decided. We got Barack Obama in there now, but our work is not done yet. We have to realize that our work is not done. We still got a war going on over in Iraq. We still got threats of war going on. We've got problems in the Gaza Strip, and we've got an economy that's tanked out pretty bad. We've also got to support our president this time in some of the decisions he's making. You know, like I admire him for his honesty because he's telling it like it is. The economy is not doing very good. You know, it's going to be difficult to stop the war. And we also got to congratulate him on his dedication to close Guantanamo Bay and stop that torture chamber. Also, I would like to see, as a city, is it possible to invite him to, personally, as a city, to invite him to come to our folk festivals and to invite his children and his family to come over to the Children's First festival we have every year, and invite him to come to several of our other events in our city, because it'd be a great boost for Tacoma Park if we could do that, and it'd be a great day of fun for the president and his family, and a great way of showing our support for him, because it'd be wonderful to have him to come to our Tacoma Park Folk Festival and take part as regular people. And it'd be great to have his family take part in the Children's First and showing how we can do. And that would do a lot for our youth, turning them away from gangs, turning them away from drugs and violence. I think we could really do a lot, because he goes to Ben's Chili Bowl and he goes to a few other places, and they say he's a foodie. In other words, he loves to eat out. So we should show him some of our businesses in Tacoma Park and invite him to come and take part in our business. I think we could. I don't see any reason why the city council can't draft up a letter and we can invite him to come on over. Show him what Tacoma Park really is. A city of activists, a city that stands up and is proud of itself. And I would love to see Barack Obama come to my city. Thanks for letting me share. you know, and I love to continue on my work for peace, and I want everybody to come on up and join me whenever I do a demonstration. You know, because everybody calls me the peace delegate in Tacoma Park, and there's no reason why anybody else cannot come up and join me in my work for peace, including Barack Obama. If he wants to come to Tacoma Park, if he's listening, come on out.
Thanks very much for your comments and that suggestion, and we will give that some thought and see if we can put a letter together.
Thank you.
May I begin?
Sure.
I'm here to ask that you postpone any purchase of the proposed license
Can you
plate scanner.
please identify yourself for the record?
Oh, I'm sorry. My name's Thomas Nephew.
Thanks.
I live on Birch Avenue in Tacoma Park, Maryland. I'm here to ask that you postpone any purchase of the proposed license plate scanner system until basic questions are fully answered. What is the compelling law enforcement purpose being served, and is this the best way to do it? Deciding whether or not to get the device should entail a public decision process, as Council Member Josh Wright said, a clear understanding of the civil liberty costs, and if we decide to get the system, clear guidelines written in advance, restricting the device to its stated purpose, and developed with council and citizen input, not just the police departments. If we get the scanner, issues like when and where it's used, whether or how long to keep scanned images, and if that's done, how to properly restrict access, again, as Councilmember Wright pointed out, to those images are all vital civil liberties concerns. As you may know, I've made contact with Sharon Bradford Franklin of the Constitution Project, a respected constitutional law think tank, and I understand she's in touch with you about helping to sort out these issues. So to help, I've brought several copies of the Guidelines for Public Video Surveillance, this document that Josh noticed, with me tonight, and had the clerk distribute them to you. While these guidelines focus on closed-circuit TV surveillance, license plate scanning is a kind of public video surveillance, too. The document provides suggestions for a model process and model legislation, and recently the city of Pittsburgh adopted legislation that was largely based on that model legislation in this report. So I respectfully request that you all have a look at this document, and I would urge you to schedule a work session with Ms. Bradford Franklin, like the one with Captain Corsi, about this issue before any decisions are made. As that notorious hippie, Justice William Rehnquist once said, suppose that the local police in a particular jurisdiction were to decide to station a police car at the entrance to the parking lot of a well-patronized bar from 5:30 to 7:30 every business day for the purpose of making a list of the license plates of cars that were driven in and parked in the lot during that time. I would guess that the great majority of people who might have the question posed to them would say that this is not a proper police function. I look forward to being part of or witnessing the process of how this decision is made, and I thank you for your time.
Thanks for your comments and interest. Anybody else who'd like to make any public comment? Seeing none, we'll move on to the city manager's comments.
I just have one item this evening. About 2 weeks ago, I sent the council an email giving you an update on the installation of the speed cameras. And in that email, I had indicated that we were estimating that we would have the cameras operational by early March. The chief shared with me today that there are some permit issues, since these are state roads, that probably will take a little bit of time. And so we're now looking most likely at an April time frame. So I just wanted to give the council an update on that. And that's it.
Okay. Any questions for the city manager? Okay, then we'll move on to our first work session item, which is a report from the Health Services Impact Committee on their research findings. And I see Vanita George and at least 4 of the 5 committee members. So I'm assuming that you all might want to come up to the table.
got it.
Welcome to all of you.
Good evening, members of the council. My name is Benita George, and I'm the staff person that was assigned to work with the Health Services Impact Committee since it was established in 2006. The Health Services Impact Committee was charged with the responsibility of collecting, gathering information from the residents regarding health care and health care access needs as a result of the Washington Adventist Hospital proposing at that particular time to relocate outside of the city. And after collecting the data, the committee was charged with reporting their findings to the council and providing some recommendations as well. As you may be aware, over the past 3 years, the committee has met with a lot of residents. They've met with the staff of Washington Adventist Hospital. They've met with the residents of the Victory Tower and the Franklin Apartment Complex. The committee also held a large public meeting here in the council chambers in an effort to get additional information. However, it was obvious that there was a segment of the population of Tacoma Park that was not participating or providing their input, and the committee decided, after preparing a survey, that they wanted to do a focus group. You all agreed and supported, along with the Washington Adventist Hospital, to support a focus group survey. The committee created a survey which was disseminated electronically to the various neighborhood organizations and community organizations. The focus group was implemented by the Rivera Group, and it dealt with 2 Spanish focus groups consisting of approximately 10 people, 1 Amharic, 1 Tigrinya, 1 in French, and 1 in English. That information has been compiled into a report. The copy of the report is in the council's conference room on the 2nd floor, and another copy of the report, of course, is on the city's website, so that you can look at it at your leisure. But tonight, the plan is for the committee to provide you with, to talk to you about their findings. They presented a paper. There are some plans to add additional information to it, but we want to meet with you. They wanted to meet with you so that we can let you know what they found and their opinions and move on from there. And at this point, I will introduce the members. We started out with approximately 10 members, but these are 4 of the 5 remaining members. And we have Patty Loveless, we have Fred Hoflanger, who's one of the co-chairs. We have Dr. Joanne Wu and Dr. Andrew Summers. And at this point now, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Summers so he can talk with you, and then the different members will also make their contribution.
Good evening. Thank you for having us. As Benita said, there is a 200-page report that's available up on the website and I guess in the lounge or somewhere upstairs to you. But we wanted to essentially talk about some of our recommendations and, frankly, impressions, and try to see if we could boil down some of those 200 pages into the highlights and, save you at least some time. But I encourage you to take a look at the detailed tables and text that's available to you upstairs and on the web. Before I say any more, though, I did want to underscore what Benita just said. The paper that you have in front of you, at least for the next 2 weeks, is, from our perspective, still a working paper. I encourage you to take a look at it, but I know that we have several additions yet to make to it, and some of those I think will come out in the various things that we have to say this evening. I think that rather than go through too many of the really, specific detailed statistics, I wanted to share some general impressions and then, back those up with a few of the statistics that we've gathered. The most important, with all due respect to John Edwards, the most important observation I think to make, and this is not going to be an earth-shattering observation to anybody, but I think it is important nonetheless, is that both the quantitative and the qualitative data that we collected really show that we have 2 Tacoma parks. And to give you a sense, the quantitative survey was largely answered by white women who come from households that make over $100,000, and no one in any focus group came from a household that earned more than $40,000 a year. Similarly, and frankly, as someone who's a health services researcher, pretty shockingly, I was impressed by the fact that the quantitative survey that we fielded, 80% of the respondents had some graduate school education, which is, well, it's a testament to, at least a large segment of the population here in Tacoma Park that we have, such highly educated, people in particularly a couple of wards that made up the bulk of the folks who answered the electronic survey. Conversely, the focus group was made up, more than 70% of the people only had high school or possibly a little college education, but didn't even complete college. And I think that I'm really glad, and I want to thank the council for working with the hospital to come up with the money to allow us to field the focus groups, because without them, I think we would have had a terribly slanted picture of the needs and interests of residents of Tacoma Park. Clearly, had we only done the electronic survey, we would have missed out on a large, important segment of our community. The focus group was, as I said, low income, primarily Black and Hispanic, and not proficient in English, so it was really good that we did it in 4 different languages. And most of the people in the focus groups wanted to see some sort of health care remain on site after the hospital goes. And most of the people in the focus groups, interestingly, said that they would continue to use WA after it was gone, although they weren't entirely sure how they would necessarily do that. The survey respondents, the ones who were highly educated and wealthy, interestingly, a minority even used WA. Only about 40% of the people who answered the survey actually used WA, and a plurality came from wards 2 and wards 1, just to give you a sense for where, a good chunk of the folks answering the survey came from. And 70% of them were homeowners. By contrast, there were almost no homeowners in the focus groups. The unemployment rate amongst people who were in the focus group was 28% overall, but generally it was in the range of 30 to 60%. I found that very surprising and, significant, particularly when you started to think about what their health care needs were. The uninsurance rate of the people who came to the focus groups was over 70%. Given the national rate of roughly 15%, that's very significant and important. The survey showed that most folks wanted to see urgent care more than anything else, 24-hour urgent care, stay on site after the hospital has departed. Second, their second choice was emergency services, and their third choice was having a primary care clinic or primary care doctor's offices of some sort. Interesting, and their fourth choice was having a wellness center defined as a place that would have health education classes, probably a fitness center, and space that would allow folks to recreate in a variety of different ways. Also might have a space for community meetings, much like we have here already at the City Hall Community Center. 1/3 said that they would like alternative care services on site after the hospital is gone. That didn't rank up as the first, second, third, or fourth choice, but I still thought that 30%, the fact that 30% of the folks answering the survey mentioning that was significant. As far as the needs of people in Tacoma Park, they said that our biggest healthcare need was care for the elderly. Our second biggest was pedestrian safety, which I really found fascinating. That's obviously not something that, whatever happens on the site after WA departs, that pedestrian safety isn't likely to be, addressed too much there. But I did think it was important that pedestrian safety ranked number 2 in terms of healthcare concerns. And then the third was addressing chronic diseases, which is not a big surprise given the epidemic of obesity and type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease nationwide. I also thought it was significant to mention and worth mentioning that 80% of the people answering the survey leave Tacoma Park for care now. So the folks who are highly educated and, pretty well off aren't particularly concerned about the move. Most of them either said they would simply go to another hospital after Wall left, or they hadn't yet decided what they were going to do, but they're already 80% of them are already, going outside Tacoma Park for some care, primarily laboratory services and OBGYN services, and to see a primary care doc. The other issues that were raised by people in the focus group in terms of things that they would like to see, within the top 5, we saw, again, urgent care, we saw a fitness or wellness center, we saw primary care offices, and then we saw a park or an athletic facility, which isn't completely dissimilar from some sort of wellness center, but it was discussed slightly differently, since the focus groups obviously were open-ended and the surveys were not. Also worth mentioning that fewer than 10% want retail or commercial development on site, were that to be an option. I realize there are zoning issues here that you definitely will want to consult with the land use committee and others at the county about, but I thought that was significant. The one exception to the dislike or disinterest in retail or commercial space is daycare. People would be happy with and would like to see a daycare facility were that an option. And although, don't quote me on this, I believe that might be one of the things that doesn't require a special exception. Not sure, but might be worth checking. The focus group also underscored, the focus group participants repeatedly, not surprisingly, underscored cost and access being their biggest concerns. I mean, the folks in the focus groups, a few of them were going overseas for care. There were people who went to Cameroon and Canada for services, but by and large, they just were not getting services. And a disturbing plurality actually are using CVS pharmacists as their, source of primary care. They go into they said they go into CVS and they talk to the pharmacist. I don't need to, explain in any detail the potential problems with that. And a large group of folks also talked about the need for translation services. Whatever healthcare services are available, if any, on site once the hospital leaves, they really need better translation services. They were not pleased with the current translation services that are being provided for them. And lastly, I wanted to mention that, we're all very well aware of, the economic downturn that we're facing. And I don't know whether the projections of, 8% unemployment, 9% unemployment, 10% unemployment are, accurate. I'm a medical sociologist. I'm not a labor economist. But I did want to share something, one statistic with you. For every 1% increase in unemployment nationally, we can expect 1.1 million more people uninsured. And based on the demographic profile of the catchment area of law, that probably translates into upwards of 1,000 people because of the current, employment situation here and the demographic makeup of the area. Could be, as little as 700, but as much as, 1,000 or 1,100 people who would become uninsured, were we to see 8% unemployment. And I bring that up simply because the likelihood that, the demand for care from people who do not have insurance in this fairly immediate vicinity increasing in, the not too near future is pretty high. All that being said, we've provided a number of recommendations. The fundamental recommendation that we have is some sort of an integrative clinic. Might involve, might be an FQHC, Federally Qualified Health Center, might be some sort of county, city, state-funded, community clinic. I think that some of my other colleagues will speak to this some more, but fundamentally we're talking about, a clinic that offers primary care services either free or more likely on a sliding scale basis because of the large number of people who are uninsured in this area who are going to need services. But instead of just being a primary care clinic, we would like to see allopathic docs who essentially follow Western traditional, for lack of a better word, medicine practices, working under the same roof as people who are providing alternative and complementary care sorts of services. I think that Dr. Wu will speak a little bit more to this, and I know Trevor Delafield, who I guess was unable to attend, wanted to talk some about something that we will be adding to this working paper that has to do with the partnership that Adventist Healthcare is trying to set up with Montgomery College and Columbia Union College around an allied healthcare program. But that's one of those things that's in the works and don't know whether it will actually come to fruition or not. And we'll be addressing that in our final report in the next couple of weeks. Oh, well, Trevor just walked in. Maybe after Joanne or Fred speaks, Trevor will have a few things to say on that too.
Okay.
Thank you.
And if I can just get one clarification on something you said. I was following it partway through and then I lost it when you were going over the relative unemployment situation for the focus group and for the people who replied to the survey, and I got a little confused about that. If you can just run through that again real quick.
Sure. Over 70% of the people in the focus groups were uninsured, and the overall unemployment rate in the focus groups was 28%, but a lot of folks, one of the problems is that there were seniors. One of the focus groups, was seniors. They pretty much were all unemployed. So when you look at the charts, when you actually look at the final report, you'll see that a number of groups appear to have unemployment rates as high as 70%. I think that would be, an overestimate, but I think it's fair to assume that the general unemployment rate amongst minorities in our community is upwards of 30%, based on, our findings. Now, again, I need to underscore that, these people self-selected into, taking this survey. We sent the survey out to all of the neighborhood associations, business associations, a number of number of opinion leaders in the community who then sent them out to their lists. You can see all of the details in the report, but this at least gives a snapshot, even if it's not completely generalizable to our community. Hopefully it will be of some use to the council.
Good, thanks, that helps.
Sure.
I just want to also mention to the council that some of the members attended the street festival in order to obtain more participation from the residents, and that information has been included. The respondents provided their comments electronically, but it was another effort of the committee to try to approach as many people as possible to give you all a sound report. Dr. Wu, would you like to?
Should I let him talk or?
Yes.
Sure. Please.
Go ahead.
Just on what we're talking about how the data was assembled. I'm Fred Hofflinger, co-chair. And when you look through this data, there's two basic sources. One is the focus groups, and that involved 58 respondents in 6 different groups. There was one for the elderly, and the others were various non-English speaking groups who had their interviews conducted in their own language and then translated for us, and that's included in the report, those transcripts. Then on the survey, which is a different source of information, that's something that we as a committee put together, came up with various leading questions we asked people to respond to. We put it on the internet and asked community groups to help spread the word. We got about 98 respondents that way. We were trying to expand the scope, so we went to a street festival and we spoke with neighbors and stuff like that. We came up with another 68, which we collected by hand, and those are included in the numbers. So when you see 162 respondents, it's taken from, on the questionnaire or the survey, it's taken from both those groups, the online and what we did on the street. So that gave us approximately 220 people giving us their direct input. We also then have to add to that number the 3 public meetings we had at sites, and the fact that the people responding in one form or another through the survey or the focus groups said that they were speaking for family members as well. So if you add that factor in conservatively, we've got about 400 people involved in this, and that's conservative because that assumes 2-member families, and that's not the case, obviously. So we haven't hit anything close to 17,000. 17,000. We didn't intend to. It's not intended to be scientific. We're stressing that. It's kind of catch as catch can. But we did try to get as much as we could reasonably, and I think we probably came close to 5% being involved with this in some way. The paper which we're going to talk about tonight, our recommendations, is not complete. It wasn't intended to be complete. We were responding to requests to have something before you at this date. We really have another 24 days, 23 days still before our mandate ends, 25 days, and then we will give you a final report at that point. So this is a working paper, not a final paper, if you view it that way. And it is not meant to be necessarily what we have. We're not feeling ourselves bound to what we got from the survey or the focus groups. We've learned from that and used it heavily, but we have added our own thoughts. We're all of us involved and have considerable experience with healthcare, and so we've added our own particular feelings for what's important to this. Thank you. That's all I want to add.
All right. I guess I'm to speak on the integrative clinic aspect of things, which seems like a new idea for most people. Is that correct? Yeah. So you're wondering probably where this idea came from. And I suppose the short answer could be my head. And I really ought to be careful because should an integrated clinic be established here in Tacoma Park, it will be one of my greatest competitors. Okay? So realizing that, I do believe in Tacoma Park, I do believe in healthcare, and I do believe in integrative medicine. I'll speak to the idea that I'm realizing that I could be putting myself out of business here. We're having a healthcare crisis nationally. We're having a healthcare crisis locally. And we can define this healthcare crisis in a couple different ways. Okay? One is a health status crisis. There is an epidemic, as Dr. Summers mentioned, of chronic disease going on. Chronic disease is 10 times more likely to kill people in Maryland, in Montgomery County, than any other kind of disease. I'm speaking cardiovascular disease or cancer, things like that. Healthcare crisis. Another way of characterizing the healthcare crisis is a healthcare access problem. Okay, you understand what's going on here. And one of the consequences of this healthcare access problem is people without adequate access are going to use means of last resort when they get ill, when they have a crisis. And that means of last resort currently is the emergency department or emergency room. So you have people who are suffering from chronic disease, who aren't able to take care of those diseases on a normal basis. And then things come to a head, a foot goes gangrenous, or they have chest pain, and they need to do something because they haven't been able to take care of that problem up till now. They go to the ED, they go to the ER, and that's where they get their primary care. What does that do? That drains resources for everybody. That care is uncompensated, and the hospital then, the provider has to raise costs for everyone across the board. So it not only affects the people who are, let's say, in the less fortunate population, it affects all of us in Tacoma Park. So, we have this negative spiral going on, and the question becomes, how are we going to address these dual challenges? How are we going to address chronic disease? And how are we going to address healthcare access problems? And if I may say so, I'm thinking about this, I think, well, we really need to change our whole view of healthcare. Healthcare as it exists now is disease management, okay? It's the interventionist model of, you don't know how to get well by yourself, so we're going to give you this medicine if you can get it, okay? But you're going to be using this medicine, you're going to be paying for this medicine all your life, if you can pay for it. There are other models of healthcare, and I won't go into technical details, but those models say, look, the human body is capable of healing itself if it's just introduced to some different ideas, let's say. Could be nutritional, could be botanical, could be nurse midwifery, things like that. And those forms of healthcare are not that expensive. In fact, in talking to practitioners, one of the greatest business expenses is space, is renting office space. So if we could, as a community, come together and offer a different model of healthcare which addresses chronic disease before it gets to the point of a crisis, we address one challenge. If we enable practitioners to practice for a lower cost and say, in exchange for this, would you offer sliding scale fees, or would you offer a free day, 1 day a week? We have an answer to the challenge of the healthcare access problem. And so an integrated clinic is kind of the linchpin between an urgent care facility, which we do need. People are going to have crises, and they're going to need urgent care. But they shouldn't be using that urgent care for their primary care. Okay? So we need an urgent care piece. We need wellness facilities, because once people get to a health plateau, once they get over their healthcare problems, they need to maintain that health. They need to understand what it is to live healthily. So we need a wellness facility. And we need this integrative care clinic to be the linchpin between those two other pieces so that people don't have to go to the urgent care clinic on a regular basis, and they are able to get to the point where they can use the healthcare facility, the wellness facility, to maintain their own health. Oh, thank you so much.
Trevor, did you want to say something on the education piece?
You'll have to move the microphone over in front of you if you could.
Nice seeing Kathy Porter up there.
Ouch.
But I really, no, I'm just used to seeing her. But I want to say that Fred and I have had a couple visits with the mayor, and in our effort to secure some information that we needed regarding costs and so on from WA, and I really appreciated your efforts to help us. and also your input as far as what you would like to see from our committee is helpful. And I'd just like to reiterate something that Fred Hofflinger said a moment ago, and that is that we've been a bit hard-pressed to pull together all that we would like to have for you and put in your hands. And we regard our report, we've worked very hard with the consultants on getting the survey data together, and feel pretty good about that. But our report, we'd like to add a little bit more to provide you with a little more integration between the findings that came out of the survey and our recommendations, and also to better take into account the WA Advanced Healthcare proposal and some suggestions for your thinking as relates to that. So that we're still working on that and hope to have. So I hope you'll see the report is kind of a work in progress, and we need to in the next little bit of time after tonight try to wrap up and finish. Yeah, I just like to say in support of my colleague, Dr. Wu, who's been with us from the very beginning. We have had really valuable input earlier on from members of the committee who, for various reasons, one being his change in membership from our committee to yours. But this little group, which is before you tonight, has been there from the beginning, but we've had really good input from the others. But anyway, as well. Anyway, Joanne Wu has had a lot to do with the recommendations and the proposal that the committee has made. And it needs to be looked at, admittedly, in connection with WA's plans and their proposal. But I hope you will look at it carefully. I feel that the two are complementary to each other, WA's proposals and our recommendations. And while the report as it now stands does not, it goes into, to some extent, into the findings that came out of the survey and the focus groups and so on, and also takes into account in a limited way, but at least addresses the WA proposal. But there was some sentiment that we wanted to give you the benefit of our opinion. So this is kind of a white paper, we're calling it, or position paper, and it has some recommendations, but want to take into account the other. And I would like to say that what Dr. Wu has just proposed is very much in line with what you will hear about when you hear WA and Adventist Healthcare talk about the Adventist philosophy of healthcare and so on, whole health, wellness, and so on, versus just treatment. And so what she is saying, Dr. Wu's doctoral work was done at, excuse me, Joanna, I'm speaking to, you ought to be saying this, and correct me if I don't portray correctly, but her doctoral degree is an accredited degree from, she's a doctor of naturopathy from an accredited school of medicine in Oregon. There aren't too many states that have accredited doctoral programs in naturopathic medicine, and Oregon is one of them, one of the few. I feel that what she is saying about an integrative approach, which takes into account natural medicine as well as as drug, pharmaceutical medicine, which really is a lot of what is going on today, is really a great proposal. I think it fits with the thinking of people in Tacoma Park. I also think that if you folks see fit to choose to explore the possibility of that as a new paradigm in Tacoma Park, as an innovative kind of thing, that it would also serve the purpose of bringing Adventist healthcare back to its original philosophy and so on, because, and I had just jotted down on a draft I'm working on for our expanded report that this adds a little bit but doesn't change anything that our first sentence says in the report as you have it, but I just added Washington Adventist Hospital was originally established as the Washington Sanitarium in 1907. It was built by Seventh-day Adventists and with the personal direction of Ellen G. White, a church founder. It was established as a naturopathic hospital, but I've added this, in the progressive health reform and temperance reform tradition of the early 19th century, out of which, in all honesty, a lot of our modern scientific method and medicine sprang. And in a sense, the hospital came into being under the auspices of B.F. Gilbert, who was founder and developer, as you all know very well, of the city, who himself operated a temperance hotel in D.C. before establishing the city of Tacoma Park, and is said to have written temperance covenants into the original city deeds. So really, Adventist healthcare, which now has transitioned into more of the modern allopathic tradition, has those roots, and I think it would be exciting for a health system which has that as its origin in a city which is progressive and reform-minded like Tacoma Park to partner together in attempting to come up with a new paradigm which might well serve as something to look at as we try to address a healthcare crisis in our country. And one of the interesting things that came to my attention not long ago, I'm semi-retired and still have a study and was working my study at home and listening to National Public Radio, and there was a seminar at NIH, and somebody there said that if we try to export traditional Western medicine to the third world, we would bankrupt those countries. So, and we have underserved.
Are you saying that's related to what's going on in our country?
It's not unrelated, is it?
Right.
Not unrelated, no.
So Trevor, before you came in, I said that we would be adding your text to the working report, and that I thought you might have something to say about the relationship between CUC and law.
Yeah, this is by way of background. One of the things that we would like to add to an expanded report is something that addresses the WA-CUC partnership, and I think also lends itself to the integrated approach that Dr. Wu has talked about, and that is, it would be exciting if, as part of their emphasis on education, if WA and CUC could work with us in developing academic offerings that would achieve this integration of alternative, scientifically based, but alternative modalities to the traditional healthcare. And so we plan to add something along that line.
Have you talked with the WA about this at all?
I really have a little bit, but not since Dr. Wu's input into our report, which kind of turned some lights on in my thinking as to how this might be done. I've talked to them a little bit more about the idea of doing some, adding new programs in the allied health field that would be useful for churches in developing church-based clinics and so on, so that healthcare is not limited to the big primary care institutions such as they have, but is something that could also be based in small church-based clinics and group practices. So I've talked to them about that, and I'm kind of excited. I propose that they pursue the option of moving the college to university status with allied health offerings as the primary graduate focus. And just within the last month or so, they have announced that they are pursuing that option. So that's kind of exciting, and would be a feather in Tacoma Park's cap, I think.
I want to make sure that my colleagues get a chance to ask any questions, other things that you need to present to us.
Just a few points briefly, if I might. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Thanks, Joe. First of all, you yourselves might find the data by ward interesting, starting on page 198 of the report from the Rivera Group. If you're not aware of it, that might be of interest to each of you individually. And then, Drew, Dr. Summers, I beg your pardon, but for the purposes of being correct, in the focus groups, there were 2 people who could be construed as affluent among the 58, and you'll find that on page 87. Not that there weren't any, but
You're right. Both were on hard. I think you're right. I've forgotten.
Third point I'd like to make is that our proposal as it is before you, and that does not include the additions that we'll be making in the next few weeks, speaks basically of a wellness center, an expanded vision of a wellness center, including primary care clinics and urgent care. It coincides with some of the items listed on the WA proposal from last fall. Those are all mentioned as well, not in the same form of vision, obviously, but I think it interacts well with their plans, or what might be their plans. The last point I'd like to make is that we believe that the city should be prepared to contribute in a monetary way to a partnership with, if not WA, then with another healthcare entity or providers, to make an expanded vision possible. That it is not simply a matter of saying there should be this, it should be provided, and waiting for somebody to provide it. I think we as a city need to be prepared for that, and WA needs to be more forthcoming about what the costs would be to achieve any of these objectives if WA is the partner. Pat, did you want to say?
Yes, just something out of a personal experience people might want to know about is the idea of a wellness program is a great idea, so that they don't have unnecessary trips to the ER. But a couple of months ago, I had an attack of that Wegener's granuloma again and landed in the ER because it came on without warning. You know, so there are cases where you can have whether you have a wellness program or not. But I have noticed that when I went in there, that there was other cases, you know, like alcoholism and mental health issues. We had one person in there who was a cutter, injured himself, and it tied the emergency room up, and it disrupted care for a lot of us who were in there. And whereas a wait in the ER would have ordinarily been about maybe an hour and a half, you know, they were coming back and forth to me, and I had to wait almost 4 to 5 hours for them to be able to complete a blood test and to be able to move me up to the intensive care unit. I had to wait another 3 hours because the doctors were tied up with these other 2 patients. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with them because they got an illness themselves, but I cannot imagine what that must be like. But I think, you know, we need to have in that area, I was thinking about it when I was in there, we need to have something in the city where we can have like a sober house or a mental health clinic where an ambulance can take someone with those issues to that particular facility. You know, like an urgent care room for that particular population. Because, you know, if I hadn't have, if I had been bleeding any worse, I could have found myself in a pickle. Or if somebody else came in with, or two other people with major heart attacks came in, or if there was a disaster of some kind of fire, somebody else may not be able to get the care because everything's all tied up, like Dr. Wu was saying. You know, we need to have a wellness. We also need to look into the idea on that site that having, you know, special facilities, you know, to take care of, you know, the ones that, you know, so we don't tie up all our facilities. Thanks for letting me share.
Fred has one quick thing, but we are really eager to answer any questions that you might have.
The quick thing is to thank Renita George for having shepherded us
Oh,
through
yes.
this procedure. We wouldn't have happened without her.
Thank you, Benita. We love you.
I want to thank all of you for all the hard work you've put in on this and for providing this draft report to us. I would say that the point that we're at right now is that the Washington Adventist Hospital has gone through a number of processes where they've gotten various approvals for moving to their new site. The upcoming one that they have not gone through is the certificate of need process at the state, and what the council has discussed is having the ability to come up with some kind of agreement in writing with WA before they complete that certificate of need process, so that if there are various things that are of utmost importance to our community for things that remain at that site in the way of addressing healthcare needs, that we can make those a priority in drafting that agreement, so that the information that you've provided is very helpful toward that end, and that will all be happening in a relatively short time frame. So it was good to get the draft report at this point to help us down that road. Do my colleagues have questions? Councilmember Snipper and Councilmember Robinson.
Yes, first I want to say thank you very much for all the hard work you've done. I know that these things always take a little longer than we'd like, but I do appreciate your persisting with them. And the material, I did look at the large report, and there's a lot of wonderful material in there. I do have a question that would be a little helpful, a little clarification kind of thing. You've indicated the wellness or fitness facility, and I guess those words for me conjure up two different things. I wonder if you'd elaborate a little bit. Is there some combination you're thinking of, or are you in fact thinking of two different kinds of facilities?
Well, I think what we are thinking of. Let me start that sentence again. It's difficult because I suspect that the people who answered the survey themselves had different images of what, you know, a wellness, you know, facility would be as opposed to a fitness, you know, center. But we were thinking, at least in our discussions, about something that would essentially be one facility serving two purposes. You know, the wellness, the fitness the fitness center would be a place to recreate / exercise. Could be set up in different ways. The wellness center was a place where we would have theoretically, you know, classes that could range the gamut from prenatal classes to, you know, yoga classes to, you know, aerobics classes to other things that aren't coming to mind immediately, but that sort of thing. I think that one thing that did cross our mind on a number of occasions was if we had something that qualified as a traditional fitness center, meaning exercise equipment and the like. The problem there is that, one, you know, capital costs, two, you know, how do we, you know, make it free or subsidized, you know, for the people who are really most, proximate to the area who wouldn't be able to afford a membership or something like that. And we've had a number of thoughts, including partnering with various nonprofits that are openly seeking partnerships with municipalities in light of the obesity epidemic and the need for, encouraging more physical activity, particularly among the 12 to 19-year-old population, which has seen a tripling of its obesity prevalence in the last couple of decades. We could talk more about this, perhaps, offline, but those are, those are the sorts of things we had been tossing about in committee.
Thank you.
Councilmember Robinson.
Well, it's coincidental that you're here, and I'm learning a lot, and I appreciate your all being here. It's coincidental that you're here tonight because Saturday morning, just a couple days ago, my wife and I came back from walking the dog, and my wife slipped in our driveway. It was really icy that day. And she fell down and couldn't get up. And the EMT guys came, and her shoulder was up like this. They thought it was dislocated. A neighbor thought it was dislocated. The EMT guys cut off the sleeve of her 30-year-old Eddie Bauer down jacket on the way to WA, and there were feathers all over the place. So we were admitted into, or she was admitted into ER on Saturday morning about 8:30, and we left ER about 11 on Saturday morning. She had gotten an X-ray. The primary care physician, who was bilingual and was handling a lot of cases that morning, Saturday morning, 8:30, gave her a good, solid diagnosis. She had not dislocated her shoulder, but she had fractured her shoulder, her humerus bone, which puts her not in a position of having the shoulder pushed back in and being out of pain, but rather being in substantial pain for a considerable period of time. So we're in a pain management scenario. I'm not saying all of that just to bring attention to my wife. While I was there for 2 or 3 hours, I got a chance to walk all around and talk to a number of people and observe who was in ER this past Saturday morning. And I think I can say that my spouse was the only urgent care person in there. I saw alcoholics and people who were very hungry, who were being given something to eat. And I saw people who were clearly obese and suffering for some reason. I don't know why. But they were being treated. They were obese and they were being treated. I didn't ask each one or follow around the doctor to try to overhear. But I did hear some things. One woman had X-rays and was given a meal. The staff there was doing a wonderful job, handling what they could do. And so a lot of what you say rings true, and it rings very true to me based on a very recent experience. And I'm very appreciative that you're here, Dr. Wu, that you're introducing this kind of approach. In Tacoma Park, we can pride ourselves for things we've done in the past, but we ought to be really thinking of ways to pride ourselves on being collaborative, on being innovative, on doing things that are economically viable, because we're a small town and we can develop systems. So I very much appreciate your being here, and I just wanted to say that coincidence rings extra true now. I don't have any specific questions. I guess if I was going to have a question, it would be something like, how do we pull this off? Where do I sign up? Or how are we going to do the kinds of things that you're proposing? So I look forward to your report.
Councilmember Klein.
We have a general rule not to say the same thing over again, but I do want to thank you guys for all the work that you've done, because you've clearly done a lot of very detailed and thoughtful work. And having spent a fair amount of time on the Tax and Services Duplication Committee, I have some understanding of what you've gone through, and you guys have just really done a terrific job. So thanks to all of you and to all the folks who aren't here. So you used the word allopathic. Does that mean traditional Western medicine?
Let's say conventional.
Conventional.
medicine.
All right.
Doesn't ever mean someone else.
Thank you. Is the Montgomery College partnership with Washington Adventist Hospital specific to the Tacoma Park campus? Or,
It's a work in progress. I've spoken with both parties, and I think that there's no answer to that question because discussions are ongoing. I know that from the college's standpoint, I'm not breaking any confidences by saying this. I think that the difficulty with the partnership that they're working on is, in large measure, I think, a problem of finances for the college. That doesn't mean it won't come off, and I certainly hope that it does. And I support their efforts, but I know that that was the last stumbling block the last time they met.
yes, money is a stumbling block to being able to do a lot of things that we would like to do.
Sure.
With that in mind, so you when you did the focus group, you asked questions essentially that were land use questions. And so what I would like to know is when you were talking to people about what it is that they would like to see, whether from a healthcare perspective or from a land use perspective, did you talk at all about what the relative cost to the community was? I was talking to this about someone in my family and saying how it was interesting to me that lots of people that you talk to say, oh, well, I'd really like to have a nonprofit village. And, the question, everybody, a nonprofit village sounds great, but it doesn't generate any tax revenue, really, for the city. It's a very large parcel of land in the city, and you even have recommendations that the city provide additional funds. And as it stands now, I think it's difficult to have a piece of property that the city has to provide public services to, but doesn't really receive very much in terms of tax dollars. And so, so when I look at things that people say about what they want, I wonder if there was any framing at all about, even if you don't know, well, this would cost you $100 a year or $500 a year on your tax bill. Was there any consideration at all given to what people would like relative to the cost that it might be for the city?
None at all. It was a closed-ended question, on survey. Interestingly, I was rather surprised. You brought up Nonprofit Village. I thought that Nonprofit Village would score really high. Out of 15 different options, plus an open-ended, other fill-in-the-blank, it scored 7th or 8th, the Nonprofit Village. So I was surprised by that. But no.
In the focus groups or in the...
That was in the survey.
Right.
In the focus groups, it was, brought up, but it was open-ended and no discussion of the opportunity, the costs of, doing one thing or the other.
The focus groups were trying to, they didn't target the financing or of any particular project, but trying to get a general idea of what the needs of the community, of that particular community may be and what impact it would have. There are some members, I'm sure, with the Land Use Committee, they'll begin to pull up information, and I think people will begin to target it. But a lot of the people that participated in the focus group were really trying to make it very clear of how some of them were upset, basically, because they depended on transportation. And their concern was how would they how would they receive medical care if it was an emergency. Many of the seniors that were in Victory Towers, their concern was, well, yes, we do. Like Dr. Summers said, they go outside. There were some of them that go outside of Tacoma Park for services. But if there was an emergency, they want to be attended to immediately. And so the question is, how is this going to happen? If they did go to Washington Adventist Hospital. The next question is, if it moved away from this area, how would they get to the site? And I think that's where Mr. Holflinger was mentioning, talking about the city collaborating with other groups. So the committee itself talked about how could we finance things and things of that nature, but most of the respondents were primarily concerned, especially in the focus group, of making it clear that they needed some type of attention, and that they were hoping that it wouldn't get replaced with housing or something like that, that there would be some type of medical facility there. And the midwifery, I think that's how Dr. Wu pronounces it. We had a large support on that too, that came out and thought that that would be helpful.
If I may.
Yeah.
I'm going to speak as a business person now, which was not how I participated in the committee. But as a business person who provides alternative health care, speaking to finances, there's a demand for that kind of care. There's certain studies showing that people want that kind of care. And Tacoma Park could serve as a draw in that respect if an integrated care clinic were present along with the other two parts of the vision. Tacoma Park could serve as a draw for the surrounding area. So I draw interest from West Virginia. You know, I draw interest as a private practitioner from Virginia. I have people calling me from out of state, and that's pretty far for people who want to travel for that kind of care. But if you have a nexus of practitioners who qualify as primary caregivers who offer a variety of care, I suspect highly as a business person that that will be an economic boon for the city. Now, providing lower cost office space for doctors doesn't mean you give up tax revenue. So what I pay in rent, for instance, just this much is taxes and this much is going to someone else out of the city, actually. So that doesn't mean necessarily you forgo tax revenue. Now, I'm really at the edge of my knowledge here, okay?
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
It's just the way that things are structured, and
all right.
And it's
you know better than I then.
It's not that it's not that I'm not saying that it wouldn't be worthwhile. It's just something I think the city has to keep an eye on, because
it definitely is.
We have a lot of nonprofit. We have a lot of nonprofits, and so I think they pay like a personal property tax, but not the land tax, which is how really Tacoma Park gets the bulk of its revenue. And
so I don't. Okay, so I won't speak. You know better than I am that. But I do think that such a clinic doesn't have to just be an output from the city for our own residents. We can serve as a draw from around the region,
right? And
that brings dollars into the city.
Well, we don't get any sales tax revenue, so if they stay and eat lunch, we don't get money from that. And when they drive across our roads and we have high impact on that, we actually have to pay to do all those repairs. So it can actually be fairly expensive. But the city engages in a lot of things that are expensive. It's expensive to do all the low-income housing support that we do, but we do it because there's a value there. So I'm not placing a value on it. I'm just asking sort of the question if that's relative.
Just to be clear, we didn't propose this thinking because we thought it was somehow a moneymaker for the city.
I wasn't implying that.
No, I didn't think you were.
So my last question is, you talked about really specifically the Washington Adventist Hospital site, but did you have any conversations about how any of these elements that you've talked about might fit in other places in the city, or even like right next door to the city? The midwifery group would love to be right on a hospital site, but I know that there are also freestanding birth centers. So there's no place in the city that's another 16-acre piece of land, but there's other places in the city, and there's this whole New Hampshire Avenue redevelopment, which is actually a major transportation corridor and has much better access than the Washington Adventist site is big, but it's in the center of the city with 2-lane roads running to it and surrounded by housing. So was there any conversation about other ways to integrate the various needs that you identified into the city?
Kind of. I'm not sure if when you just asked the question, I'm not sure if you were talking about conversations we had or conversations that occurred in the focus groups.
Conversations that you had. And I wouldn't expect necessarily the focus group people would think about that. But you guys have had, have immersed yourselves in this for a year, and
I think...
Actually, there were some discussions in the focus group, some of the focus groups, not intense discussions around that particular issue, but there were discussions where people said things, I'm paraphrasing because I don't remember exactly the quote, but basically they said, we just need, the services to be proximate to where we are. Meaning they weren't saying, we want healthcare services and we only want them on the WA site, So if if a pharmacy, for instance, which came up in several focus groups, were to be placed in the New Hampshire corridor as opposed to on, the WA campus, I'm certain that some of the people in the focus groups would have been just as happy with that. Go ahead, Trevor.
Yeah, there's actually quite a bit in the report as it now stands about healthcare providers, including WA, but other hospitals in the area and people who are primary caregivers, practitioners. Joanne, and there's a link in the report that will take you to sites. But actually, we were not focusing just on what happens at the WA site. We were looking at healthcare service and needs in the community as a whole. There's quite a little section where which Joanne again contributed a lot to, dealing with fitness centers that the city already operates at Maple and in New Hampshire as parts of a healthcare delivery system. And she suggested that maybe there might be occasion, in addition to whatever happens at the WA site, as far as health, as far as fitness and wellness, might be the place for other facilities, additional facilities of that kind. So we were trying to look at
in some of the discussions we had, we did talk about the possibility of a clinic, being placed in a different location. This was actually before we were talking about a collaborative model, integrative clinic, but we talked about the possibility of a clinic, a big clinic, not a tiny clinic, but a big clinic, up around Arliss, where we were expecting something at one time, not necessarily right at that corner, but in the general area up there, in the let's call it the Flower Piney Branch, General Long Branch area, or the Carolyn University area, which obviously has all sorts of problems we don't need to go into. But I think that the only advantage, the only thing that we didn't talk about off the WA site was fitness recreation facilities, and I think that had a lot to do with the fact that we knew there was a lot of space there, and that was something that potentially could take up a whole lot of space, depending upon what those facilities were.
What I'd like to do at this point is, we've got 3 other council members who have some comments or questions, so if I can move to Councilmember Wright.
I'll just quickly say thanks for all your work on this. Had a couple of questions and then sort of items that actually I think would be helpful for you guys to follow up on and write a little bit more in the final report, which I think would be helpful in our discussions with law. So one was I very much like the kind of 3 recommendations and the interconnectedness of urgent care, primary care, and wellness, and the sort of cascading aspect of them. You have to have wellness to ideally address having less primary care, and then having that also addresses less urgent care, which I think is good. One question I had was related to transportation. So was there any talk about, didn't seem to be a primary recommendation, but if people are going to use the primary care facility here somewhere in Tacoma Park, but they probably would still need transportation to a specialty care, which would be at the hospital, was there any thought given to that being a specific recommendation that there would need to be some, a transportation vehicle beyond public transit for people to go between here and the...
Some people did bring that up, and the shuttle bus came up. There were some senior citizens that brought that up because that's a concern. But they also utilize the existing services that's made available for physically challenged individuals and senior citizens. But it was discussed about having a shuttle, that perhaps the hospital, and of course, again, they mentioned the city, and whatever other funding source to assist in transporting residents back and forth to the hospital that's off campus, and perhaps, outside of Tacoma Park. But it wasn't that it would run on a regular basis. It would be on a structured time, a structured schedule because of the economy. But that was brought up a little because people are, many of the less affluent, more or less walked to the hospital. And so if they were to access the other hospital that's outside the city, transportation would be a concern.
The Spanish-speaking group, there were at least 2 people in that focus group that either assumed that there would be a shuttle that would somehow be provided that would go from roughly New Hampshire and University. That wasn't mentioned, but clearly that sort of area up north, or Metro might put a new ride-on, might have a new bus line or something. They clearly intended to continue using law, but they also clearly didn't know how they would possibly do it unless there was a dedicated service to get them there.
One thing I'd like to add is the possibility of sharing the costs in part of providing transportation to certain people could be the basis of a contractual relationship between the city and law. That might be the beginning step towards a further development of a relationship to keep the long-term care provided on the site.
On the finances, your question, Council Person Clay. This doesn't provide answers, but it's again from the report, and I think it highlights some of the kinds of things that need to happen as far as finding answers to that question. There's a paragraph here that says we must understand and compare healthcare operational costs and revenue support, including tax relief and government and regulatory subsidization, in order to clearly quantify any difference that may then be addressed by government, citizens, and healthcare providers sharing a common responsibility. It is not sufficient to simply state that facilities should be provided and wait for this to occur. It's something we all need to look at.
Mayor, I think you could provide more information for us as this is the continuum between urgent care and emergency care. So this is still very gray to me. My understanding of urgent care can be something as minimal as being open 24 hours a day and just having a primary care physician there, and then full-on emergency room. And it seems like there's a lot of gray area in there, and I think that's one of the things we're going to be negotiating heavily with the hospital around about what actually happens in urgent care / emergency care. So that, I think more clarification in the final report would be helpful about that.
All right, I'll make note of it and we'll pull it together. Part of the reason why you hear the committee members referring to the next couple of weeks is that their expiration is February 27th.
Yeah.
So we appreciate the question so we can pull this together.
Related to what you just said, Josh, while we'll be happy to put some more in there about the continuum that you were just describing, I'd strongly encourage you to also pose that same question to the Land Use Committee, because in recent weeks they've had a meeting with the Executive Director of the Planning Commission, who's provided a lot of good information on that exact topic from a regulatory standpoint. The difference between the two.
For our purposes, the working definition we've been using is emergency means immediate access to an OR, and urgent does not include that.
OR being operating room.
ER.
ER means they can take you to an OR immediately.
Just a personal.
Oh, go ahead.
Just a personal observation, and I'm not sure what will happen when their hospital, primary care hospital, is not here. But I do some part-time work as a night chaplain, mainly at Holy Cross, and I too have had my wife at the ER. Well, I don't think I've been there. I've been there too. But one thing that I have observed at Holy Cross, which I kind of like, is the separation of the two. Urgent care, Holy Cross has a separate urgent care department, their own entrance and everything, from the ER. And I did my CPE at Washington Hospital Center, and of course they separate the ER and the trauma center, which is a whole another whole level. But I think the kind of thing that you observed might be alleviated if there were separate entrances or separate place even in the facility for the different levels, or help triage a little bit.
I will say that the EMT truck came in and she was wheeled right in and was checked in one way as opposed to the walk-in.
You have other questions, Councilmember Wright?
Just make two final points. One is it would be good to know what the likelihood of actually changing the state regulation that you cite in here so that you could have this integrated clinic actually exist. I know the midwives have been dealing with this, and I know Delegate Mazur is trying to work on a compromise with doctors. So some sense of whether this is actually likely to be possible given the strength of the medical and doctor lobby would be helpful. And then the last point I would just make about the question is just, I think we have to be very, very careful about what we would decide as a city to fund. My personal opinion is that healthcare is not a function that is well funded, or it should be funded by a small local government. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that the scope of and where people are going to come from to access that service is much larger than the city. And you have to be very careful that we don't create an undue tax burden on the city government. I personally feel that healthcare is much more effectively funded at the state or federal level than local municipalities. So that's just
I think that
about how we
one thing that I'd like to toss in is that while I believe everything we've said tonight, we've said with one voice, the one thing that I've heard where I know there is not consensus across the entire committee is the issue of whether or not the city should be getting involved with funding in the way Fred described.
Thank you.
Councilmember Siemens?
Thank you, Mayor. I'll try to be quick. First of all, I do want to thank you for this, your dedication to this very difficult job. I appreciate the work you put in and the meaningfulness of the recommendations that you made. And I especially appreciate the way that you modified your approach when you found that you weren't getting a good cross-section of the city residents. I think that speaks well for your committee. Just two quick questions. One we've talked about, and I'm not sure that there's a good answer, and that is, but I know many of my constituents in Ward 4 have expressed to me their desire that a emergency facility be left behind when the hospital leaves. And I just I noticed that you listed that as one of the, I think, ranked 4 on the survey, but yet it wasn't in your recommendations, and I just was curious why, and I don't need a big long answer tonight, but
I think most people don't understand the distinction we just drew between emergency care and urgent care.
I think fundamentally people want 24-hour service available to them for, broken arms, stitches, fever, wildly vomiting, things like that, that could be provided. You could be cared for in a 24-hour urgent care facility. You wouldn't necessarily have to have a 24-hour emergency room, which is why we're recommending the urgent care as opposed to 24-hour urgent care as opposed to a standalone ER.
I know some of the seniors and disabled people living in my neighborhood, fear having a life-threatening event and not having an emergency facility nearby. I think that's their foundation for their desire.
I'd encourage you to read some of the verbatim quotes from the transcript in the focus group. I found it interesting. There are several people who say exactly what you just said, but then they follow up and say, I don't really need an emergency room.
Okay. And my second question is, and Dr. Wu, you can probably answer this best. You mentioned this is a new paradigm for the integrative clinic. Is it truly a new paradigm, or is it something that is being experimented with in other parts of the country? And have you looked into that, if it is?
I guess we consider a new paradigm for the East Coast. So, integrative healthcare clinics exist in the Cancer Treatment Centers of America. The closest one is in Philadelphia. There's one in Seattle. There's one in Tulsa, I think, Oklahoma. There's one in Zion, Illinois. So in those cancer treatment centers, naturopaths, acupuncturists, nutritionists, and allopathic doctors work side by side for people with pretty serious cancers. In Clifton Springs, New York, there is a hospital, an allopathic hospital, that has returned to its naturopathic roots, much like WA has, or might, let's say, and has really established a naturopathic wing of its hospital, and its director is a colleague of mine. Let's see.
Okay, I don't need a comprehensive list, but so there is some experience with this. And,
yes, and there are clinics that also address the underserved. So where I come from, where I intern in Portland, Oregon, there's clinics that serve the migrant farm worker community. There's the clinic that specifically targets homeless youth. You know, there's clinics that target people with addiction problems. So there are these clinics that can work with certain populations that you know, allopathic medicine may have a harder time working with sometimes. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Great.
That conference that I mentioned listening to at NIH, I learned that there are also some colleges and universities that are including the alternative modalities in medical training. One that I know of specifically, and I don't mean that there are a lot of them, but there are some. One that I'm aware of is the University of Arizona, and they are looking at this both from the standpoint of treatment and wellness, but also from the standpoint of finances.
Well, I thank you all for your work on this, your recommendations, and I look forward to us moving forward. Thank you.
Councilmember Barry?
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you all. You, I think, performed a very important service by bringing attention to the needs of people whose voices we don't often hear from. So in giving them a voice about the kinds of health care they would like and need, you performed quite a valuable service and certainly opened my eyes to some things. Just a couple of observations. One is that the priorities that the people who participated in the study and your recommendations seem to dovetail nicely with some informal conversations that we on the council have had, and also seem to mirror in part what the hospital seems to be thinking in the directions that it's going. The other point is a potential role for the private sector in that a trend seems to be these days with respect to the pharmacies in particular. I think Walmart has by placing a doctor in their employ in the pharmacy to act as a sort of primary care for people who prefer to come in and talk to the pharmacist, but in this case they would have an opportunity to talk to a physician. And because in Ward 6 in particular, along the New Hampshire University corridor, there is a CVS now, there's a Safeway, and I think there will be a Walgreens. Walgreens owns a big chunk of that area on the other side of University, and it may be that in the future, as they build a Walgreens, it might be possible even for the city to have a conversation with them as they develop their plans to see if it might be possible to bring a doc in the box or whatever they call it into play. The other is, and this goes beyond the fixed plot of land that the hospital, is leaving, but hopefully will leave one of these things or more of them in place, and that would be some kind of mobile clinic. They may have one already. They may have a vehicle, and they occasionally go off campus, as it were. But it seems to me, with the work that they're doing now in trying to study and understand the health needs of the many different minority populations that we have, understand better their health histories and the particular kind of health problems they have, it would seem that some of the solutions, particularly in the primary area, might be in actually traveling to the population rather than expecting them to come to the campus. And then finally, and this is just a brief question, would it be possible for you to just quickly summarize what you found the ward differences being in terms of what they told you, in particular those wards with the less well-heeled residents?
I have a little bit on that thing. When we sorted it by preference, this really comes out of the Rivera Group report, but we knew that we wanted to transition, have more of a transition between that and our recommendations and so on. But anyway, when we sorted by preference, the top three answers, just to give you some specifics, for example, looking at the ER urgent care facility answer, it was one of the top three preferences. And it was the first preference in Ward 1, Ward 2, Ward 3, and Ward 4. It was also the first preference among males. And it was the first preference among whites. And let's see, it was second preference in Ward 5. And second choice among blacks. So this kind of, as you're saying, there's a coincidence between our findings and what we were hearing from people and the recommendations and the WA proposal. Fitness and wellness facilities was one of the top three preferences. And it was the first preference in Ward 5. And second preference in Ward 1, the fitness facility.
If I could piggyback on that, I think that the fact that ER urgent care facilities was number one in wards 1, 2, and 3. I'm sorry, 2, 3, and 5. Tell me again.
1, 2, 3, and 4.
Okay, 1, 2, 3, and 4. I think most of those people were leaving a majority of those people weren't using WA for anything other than urgent care, and my sense is that they don't have a need for, an operating theater. Another reason why we're leaning towards 24-hour urgent care as opposed to standalone ER, given the fact that they don't get their health, a majority of them don't get their healthcare services in Tacoma Park. I think that's mainly, and also a large majority of the people who responded from those wards had at least one child in the household. So I'm thinking, it's broken bones, stitches, food poisoning, things like that are the biggest draws for why one would want some sort of 24-hour services.
Did the poorer people seem to want primary care more than they wanted the urgent care? And does it suggest that there is a gap in the provision primary care?
No, actually, they wanted urgent care more than they wanted primary care, but we have both in the focus groups and in the surveys, but primarily in the focus groups, there's plenty of evidence to suggest that they wanted, emergency care, but they're using it for primary care. And so, in some ways, emergency room may have been a proxy for having, a clinic nearby.
I would say that the survey targets more affluent, or, we didn't, the focus group was our best way of getting at your ward, for example. I was just looking here at Ward 6. We didn't, and probably it's just because of the number of respondents for the reason I gave, but there wasn't a clear first, second, or third preference in the case of your ward. There's a pretty clear first, second, third preference. But from the target groups, I think we have a feel for that, and focus groups. And that will appear in the Rivera.
Council, I'm sure you all will probably have questions that might cross your mind as the evening progresses. So if you do, feel free to send me the email, and I will collect that information and share it with the members, and so we can get the report to you on a timely basis within our before our term expires.
Good. Thank you all very much.
You're welcome.
We appreciate all the effort you put into it. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be back in 10 minutes or less. Ludlow, so if you'd like to kick it off, or however you want to do it,
Well, I'll say hi, but I'm going to turn it right on over to Ann Seacott to give a little bit of update on our legislative program this year and some of the issues that we're going to face and have already started facing. So, Ann?
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Hi. Good to see everybody again. And for the record, Ann Seacott. We wanted to, joined by Michelle Douglas. I think this is the first time most of you have met Michelle. The lobbying team of Seacott and Elliott is Ann Seacott, Robin Elliott, Michelle Douglas, and Michelle and I are basically working on Tacoma Parks issues. We will just say that the beginning of this session has been very interesting just in terms of the budget picture and sort of the tone in Annapolis, which has been kind of different than past years because of the very severe budget deficit the state is facing. There is a lot of hesitation among legislators around putting in pieces of legislation that involve any kind of fiscal note. As a matter of fact, what was it, Friday the Senate got the memo, and today the House got the memo from leadership saying bills that have any fiscal note will not pass without first going through leadership. So they're very serious about not spending a dime if they can help it. At the same time, everybody's got their fingers crossed about what might come from the federal government to the state. So it's a waiting game, really, until we see what happens in terms of a federal stimulus package, as well as what happens with March revenue estimates. So, but legislators are generally going to be playing it very conservatively. That's the overall sort of feel in Annapolis right now. Everything is focused on the budget. There were, in terms of how the budget looks related to local governments and municipalities, there were no significant outright reductions to, no cuts by the governor to local budgets. There was certainly a fear that a lot of cuts were going to be passed down to the counties, which didn't happen. Now there are a lot of counties aren't getting some of the revenue in terms of the special funds that rely on different kinds of tax revenues and whatnot. So I guess as a segue a little bit into program open space, that overall that pot of money is reduced, but that's not a budget cut because that's funded through transfer tax revenue. That pot is simply smaller. So locals are being affected certainly in that way from the state budget, but we've avoided the major cuts that I think everybody was afraid was going to happen.
So far.
Thank you. I think a number of us were quite surprised by the governor's announcement last week that the Board of Public Works was not going to make additional rescissions to the fiscal year '09 budget, and instead wait and see what the feds come up with. So it's given everybody a little bit of hope, but we have to realize that it's not a done deal. The 2010 budget isn't a done deal until the end of the legislative session. The current fiscal year 2009 budget is open to rescission basically at any point, so session or not. So we'll keep knocking on wood. One of the and you feel free to ask any questions, or maybe we'll finish with a couple of the main pieces of legislation that we know you're interested in, and then you can ask questions about any of it if you'd like.
I just had one quick question on the waiting to see what happens with the federal stimulus package. I know there's been talk of various ways that the state might consider using its money, and there have been a lot of calls for counties and municipalities to kind of put calls on the state's money and submit whatever it is for shovel-ready projects or those types of things. Has the discussion about any of that gelled or changed significantly, or are we still at the state is asking the feds, we all should ask the state, and it'll all be sorted out later?
I think that's pretty much where we are. The budget was just released last week, so they're still in the process of really reviewing it, analyzing it, and breaking it down by departments. The governor's budget anticipates about $450 million worth of federal stimulus to offset some Medicaid spending. The reason the governor withheld the rescissions that were going to happen last week for this year's budget is that there's now an estimate that it might be a much more substantial number that comes into the state, and for programs much beyond Medicaid, including some of these shovel-ready programs. So I would say keep making the requests to the state, and they are continuing to make requests to the federal government. I think the governor feels much more comfortable with the fact that he expects to be getting a lot more money into the state as a result of the Federal Stimulus Act. There are members of the General Assembly who, quite frankly, are very concerned about the way that that's going to be spent and the fact that it would have to happen, the money would have to go out and be used in a 2-year time frame. So that's really a large piece of some of the caution that's being put out there by the Department of Legislative Services and others.
Their caution is because they don't think it would be spent in the 2 years, or
that it needs to be sustainable by the government after 2 years, so that the money would dry up in 2 years.
Thank you.
Sure. In terms of some of the priority legislation, the Just Cause eviction bill is working its way through the Montgomery County delegation. the bill sponsored by Delegate Heather Mazier is, had the hearing before session, and Councilwoman Clay testified, as well as some other folks in support of the bill. And there were some questions from some of the members of the delegation who had some valid concerns, and who I'm sure also been talked to by the opposition, the landlords and property owners and association. And what has happened is that we've been working very closely with Delegate Mazier on some amendments to the bill that mitigate some of the opposition. There was a phrase in the bill that the opposition has said creates perpetual leases, and that's not what anybody intended to do. So we've changed that language, as well as tweaked things here and there without giving up anything substantial. And at the County Affairs Committee of the delegation meeting last week, Michelle was there. They, after going through all the different amendments, R.C. Bates, who lobbies with the county, said that he believed that some of those changes actually might get the county council and county executive to proactively support the bill. So the county council will meet next Monday, and we want to delay actually the vote in the committee. We have the votes in the County Affairs Committee of the delegation to pass the bill, but we want to delay that until next week, after the county council has hopefully taken a positive position, because the day after the committee, the full delegation will take a vote, and we think we'll have a better outcome on that vote if we have the county's proactive support on the bill. So we are making progress, and have had legislators feel more comfortable with the bill with some of these amendments. So we're feeling cautiously optimistic about that bill. Councilman Clay's been very helpful with some of those amendments as well. Going back to program open space, there has been legislation introduced.
It's an emergency bill.
Senate Bill 163 that does what we know the city of Tacoma Park and many other municipalities and local governments have been interested in, which is clarifying the program open space money can be used for indoor projects as well as outdoor projects. It is an emergency bill, which means that it takes a few more votes to pass, but when it passes, it goes into effect 30 days after being signed into law, after being signed. And so it just means it's quicker. We don't have to wait until July necessarily. It is a department bill, so it is coming out of DNR, and we're not picking up on opposition to this. This has been the way the program has run for many years. Everybody seems to think that it's the right way to spend the money.
Many jurisdictions have used the money for their indoor projects.
Absolutely.
But this movement toward a different interpretation didn't just come out of thin air.
Yes, it kind of did. It was a legislative audit that's done each year or on a regular basis, and in the previous years, it hadn't been raised by them as an issue. This past year it was raised as an issue, that they would like to have a clarification of the intent of the legislature.
And so the department actually put the bill in to demonstrate that this in fact was the intent. And so it's really being seen, I think, more as a clarifying piece of legislation. In the briefings that have happened on program open space over the last week and a half, there haven't been any questions raised by committee members about that, and that issue has come up, just been raised, but it hasn't. No one seems to be challenging it as a concept.
Okay.
It doesn't have a hearing scheduled yet, but we'll be looking for that. I would assume that at least written testimony, if not oral testimony, will be appreciated. And we'll see from the, we'll reach out to the department and see what kind of testimony they're looking for, as well as committee staff, and see if this really needs a whole lineup of people saying this is a good thing to do, or if
Right.
stack a letter saying this is the right thing to do might be better.
Right. The department head appreciated our effort to help and will do what they feel is most appropriate.
I'll also mention the instant runoff voting legislation. This is,
I'm not sure if everybody is aware of some of the issues around there, so you might want to describe it.
Sure. The issue is that with the state about to purchase new machines for the statewide vote, statewide elections, there is certainly a need to make sure that those machines are going to be compatible with instant runoff voting, as well as other different mechanisms that some other local jurisdictions either have or may in this near future put into place. And part of it is certainly a very practical matter for the city of Tacoma Park, since you have instant runoff voting, and it'd be good to just be able to use one machine for everything and have it all work. Part of it is the organization Fair Vote is interested in being able to promote more and more jurisdictions being able to do this in local races. And so they have been working with Susie and myself and Councilman Snipper to see about trying to get legislation passed to guarantee that the new machines that the state is going to purchase will be compatible. There was a request made before there was any talk of legislation to the Board of Elections asking that they, in their procurement of new machines, make sure that that is part of the contract. And their response back was, well, we'll look into it. We'll give some consideration to that. Not that they would do it. Senator Jamie Raskin and Delegate Tom Hucker have taken on the cause. Senator Raskin has taken it on really in two ways. One is he and Delegate Hucker had introduced a Montgomery County bill that was specific to ensuring that the state was going to purchase machines that would be IVR compatible, IRV compatible. And then Senator Raskin is working on a broader statewide measure as well. On the local bill, it was actually supposed to have a hearing this past Friday, but on Wednesday, I believe it was, the State Board of Elections the County Board of Elections as well as the County Council voted to oppose the bill. And so Senator Raskin withdrew the bill, only after which, finding out that the provisions in the bill, after explained in a different way to the contact at the Board of Elections, actually was going to be acceptable to the State Board of Elections. So there was a lot of miscommunication or lack of communication. I got this story from Jamie Raskin's staff on Friday, that they were in an upheaval about it, that actually this could have worked. And the miscommunication was over the implementation date. The State Board of Elections was really balking at trying to have everything in place by the 2010 election. Yes, 2010 election. So, but when it was explained, no, we're talking about implementation 2012, they thought, well, maybe that's doable. So, anyway, so that local bill is no longer. There is still, however, the statewide bill that Senator Raskin he hasn't introduced it yet, but it's a bill that is a broader bill. First of all, it's statewide. Secondly, it is a state voter. I don't know the title. Something like voting machine voting machine warranty. Something like that. Warranty's in the title, and the idea is it'll include several components. One of which is not specific to instant runoff voting, but says that the company that the machines that are purchased, that the company would have to have software available or work on the software to be able to make the machines compatible with local laws and both existing local laws and then for a couple of years out be able to upgrade machines to, in case, for example, other jurisdictions implemented instant runoff voting. So he's got this broader bill that will be introduced at some point and try to address, I think, some other issues. I'm not clear what the other issues are that are going to be worked on, but then also make sure that the machines will be IRB compatible. So that's a lot to say that nothing's happened yet. But things have happened. Things are in progress. Things are working themselves out. Nothing to show for it on paper right now.
Having said that, I just want to indicate how fortunate I feel that we do have Ann and Michelle on board. The calls that I've gotten indicate that they've really been looking out for our interests, and there's lots of heads up about things, making sure, is it something that would affect us or not? Should they look into this further, that kind of thing. And just kind of putting in my plug, I really appreciate it. It's been very useful. And so I think that we're well positioned to hear things right away as things change in Annapolis, and I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Good. I had one other question about whether you've heard anything about any possible change or movement on speed camera legislation, mostly in terms of, my sense was there was talk of possibly changing the revenue so that the state might grab all of the revenue either from the current pilot project for Montgomery County, or if there were to be a statewide bill, that it might go toward the state taking all the money and therefore make it not feasible for anybody to do it, since we're just about to implement that.
There are a couple of speed camera bills that are in, and we've been sharing those with Susie. The budget hearings have not happened that would relate to that yet, so they can't actually they can't take money and switch money around in a budget in a policy bill. They'd have to do that within the budget hearing. So those haven't yet occurred, so that discussion hasn't happened. I don't know whether you've heard any rumors. I have not yet.
The only rumors I have heard were basically that the state needs money and they're going to take that money.
There are really two schools of thought going on. One is anybody that identifies, some revenue source, it's possible that the state, given the deficit, may want to grab it. And then we have the news from last week that counters it a bit, that it looks like the federal funds that are going to come our way are much more significant than anticipated. So, we have sort of a tug and here and there, and we don't know yet until things solidify in the federal level, really what's going to happen with a lot of the funding sources.
Yeah, because I just hate to be in a position of, we just heard earlier this evening that implementation will probably be April, and we get to the end of the session and we've just implemented, and they go, oh, you don't get any money from those. And it's like, well, wait a minute, we just spent the money.
Thank you for letting us know.
We'll keep an eye out for that.
Councilmember Siemens, you had a question?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I thank you first for your update tonight. And it's not really related to any legislation, but since you all have been in this business for a while, you may be aware of legislation either that's been passed or is maybe still on the table, governing license plate scanners and regulating them in any way. I'm just curious if you have seen anything on that.
License plate scanners.
Yes, it's a
I
new
haven't
technology that is installed in the police car, and it basically reads all license plates
Right.
as the car drives
As a
by
quick
and
check.
collects them into a database.
Right. I haven't seen anything on that yet. We can do a double check, though.
Appreciate it.
Sure.
Just because we're contemplating purchase and implementation, and if we do, how we might do that, the counterplay between security concerns and civil liberties concerns.
Sure. Thank you for letting us know.
Councilmember Wright.
Just very quickly, I wonder if you've seen anything on any of the legislation that's a reaction to the state police spying scandal. Has there been any talk about that legislation? Because some Tacoma Park residents were victims of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, the bills, Senator Raskin has introduced a bill, and Delegate Hickson has introduced a bill, and then the governor
And
also
they're
has.
co-sponsored by the governor.
Right,
They're-
they're co-spon- okay, then
they're-
that's something
They're
else.
administration bills co-sponsored by Senator Raskin and Delegate Hickson. So
And-
that they are in, and there are hearings coming up on those.
And the ACLU has is holding a rally next Monday night in Annapolis. There's going to continue to be a lot of press around the issue.
And is your senator's support for passage of those bills?
I think there's an awful lot.
Yes.
It doesn't mean I think it's taken
There
for
will be a
granted.
debate.
But something is likely to get through.
One of the categories of bills that they've been alerting us to are also the standard group of immigration kind of control bills that come through. And so I don't know if you've got any update on those, but obviously when we get to that point, we'll testify or submit written testimony about it.
We haven't seen the slew of them yet. One or two.
Right, there are going to be literally probably at least 1,000 bills or more in the next 2 weeks coming in. And we have the deadlines for introducing bills in the Senate on February 6th and in the House on February 13th. So we're going to see a tremendous volume of bills coming in over the next couple of weeks. Sorry to tell you.
No, I know that.
But and that's probably
how
when
it's
we
fun.
will see a lot of those come up. But we are definitely keeping track of those, along with death penalty, a number of issues that we know that your residents are interested in. I will tell you that I talked to a couple of folks who I know have files as a result of the spying, and they haven't yet received their own personal file yet from the state police, which is supposed to be part of the agreement.
And that onslaught of bills that's about to come tells me that I'm going to spend more time in Annapolis with the MML Legislative Committee reviewing bills.
I would imagine.
The legislators have been told that there was a record number of requests for bills. This was at least last week, and it's just been they've been backlogged in the Department of Legislative Services. So we will be seeing probably a couple of thousand.
Yeah.
They're burning
Most
the
likely.
midnight oil.
Yes, indeed.
Yes, they are. They were actually working yesterday.
Any other questions? Well, thank you all very much. We appreciate this update and look forward to more of them and what sounds like continuing the good relationship that we've established with you as our lobbyists, and we appreciate all your efforts.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good to see everyone.
And we'll now move to our last item, and I think somebody has to find them and bring them in from out in the lobby. Our last item is the Mosaic Project status report.
Groundhog Day?
But he saw his shadow 6 more weeks of winter.
Did he? Oh,
Yes.
now. We have some things to show you.
All right, it sounds like it might take a couple of minutes to get set up. You want to,
Well, I just think you're not going to be able to see because the screen is here.
oh, we come down when you're ready, but I didn't know if you wanted to say a few things while she's getting it set up.
Well, let me say a few things. I'm Alice Sims, and we're with the Tacoma Mosaic Project. And I want to thank the city, and I want to thank the Tacoma Foundation. And I want to introduce Atura Ho, who's the lead artist, and Laurie Stepp, who's the co-chair of the project and also the communications person. So she is going to show some slides to you all and show the website to you all. And you have a handout that talks about what we've done so far and the budget so far. And I guess I could, if you have any questions about that, I could answer those, or if you have any questions about anything. And otherwise, we can just, are you going to bring the screen down?
Yeah, but only after we get up, otherwise.
Okay. Oh, otherwise you can't see me and I can't see you. So are there, should I say more? I mean, I can talk ad nauseum about this, but you do have the handout.
Yes. If there are any questions, first off, and then we can go down and see the presentation.
No, I'm not going to help you at all.
Well, we can just go sit there, and then she'll feel pressured to make sure that everything is up. Although if we had our renovated Chambers auditorium, we wouldn't have to go through that little song and dance.
That's true. That's going to be...
And one of the things that we look forward to that is some plugs to plug in laptops since we're all tripping over the extension cords in here.
I want to thank the recreation department too for giving us space and for helping us with scheduling.
Can folks hear me talk? This level? I don't know if anyone has been able to look at the website.
I have.
Great. The color's a little off, but it'll do to give you a sense. We've really been using the website to sort of document the project. So anytime you're wondering what we're doing, I try to keep it updated to be able to go through. And the work in progress section is really where things are documented. Our timeline, so you can see what our plans are. The building sites that we're looking at, which we'll talk about some more in a little bit, and I'll try to make it brief. Our community involvement, I think, has been really successful. We started with Arts and Humanities Day, festivals, kids doing paper mosaic, just sort of getting the word out. We had a meeting on the 6th of November, and we had over 50 people show up. It was great. And the participation has consistently been just wonderful. This is our meeting. I'm not going to play the video, but it...
Oh, yeah, you are.
Not the whole thing.
That was a full hour and a half.
That was
See it at your leisure.
hour and a half meeting with people from the Visionary Art Museum in Baltimore, and they have been sort of our technical advisors because we really are concerned about the sort of archival quality of whatever we do, and they were just enormously helpful, and we feel very confident that whatever we put up is going to last a very long time. Workshops continue. This is with the Down Syndrome Association. Alice has been doing things. We've had a very successful and just wonderful. Everybody's really enjoyed ESOL class at Piney Branch with Rachna. Ricky approached us at our first meeting, and so kids from just everywhere brought in things from home with patterning, from, you know, clothing they brought in, somebody's fabric, their mother's purse. I mean, just wonderful. And we've really had a relationship with this class. They started making drawings, and we're thinking about using words a lot in certain smaller areas. So we're getting kids to write things in different languages, and they've really gone through the whole process with clay, making clay, and then the last week glazing the clay. And this is all here. You can.
The clay pieces will be part of the mosaic.
The clay will be. It's a high fire clay, so it's fine for outdoors. Our tour has been working with the Maryland Multicultural Youth out of Langley Park, and we were just sitting outside talking about how one of these kids is going to make a great intern, if not several, right? So just great, just wonderful interaction with all aspects of the community. We've had workshops. We had Nancy Weiser come from Weiser Glass, and we were packed. I had 15 people on the waiting list after having two classes booked.
20 people showed up.
20 people showed up, and
which was
everybody had a great time. So we had glass cutting, we had exterior clay, and this is our crew. If our tourist says he wants leaves, they've promised they will crank out leaves for us. And that continues. This weekend, our tour is doing 3 basic mosaic classes. People, a little bit about Arturo and Alice if you want more background. Partners, Visionary Art Museum. And also we have this core group, sort of the Mosaic Collective. We do have a blog. People are showing their work on the blog. It's a little hard to get people to really write a lot, but it's there, and people are putting their work up. Just sort of community building. People can see what everybody else is doing. Somebody's kitchen I found so inspiring. So that's all there. And partnerships, I'm just say briefly, thanking some of the people. Donations are rolling in just today. Was it Architectural Ceramics in Rockville?
Ceramics called me and said they have 2 pallets of glass and more pallets of tiles. And we've gotten donations from Color Tile, from a glass workshop, Patty Woods, Miles Glass as promised is Samira and some glass. And Maryland Mosaics has given us tools and tiles for exterior and glass. So people are being very generous and are into the project.
Yeah, it's just been great. So I try to keep that updated. We didn't want everything to be electronic, so we've also been making posters because there are people that just aren't on the computers. So we've been making posters as well to kind of get the word out.
You can't see that, but that's a lot of different languages. Learn, Create, Participate have been written and are a part of that poster that we've gotten from different people in the community.
Yeah, it's, French and Spanish and Amharic and
Vietnamese,
Bengali, and that's something we've talked to the kids at the ESOL kids, and they've been great. Just in case anyone hasn't seen Arturo's work, and I think this really shows how Mosaic can just transform, and I think for us that's been sort of a key term, that it be transformative. I mean, it's just great.
This is at the middle school in Tacoma Park.
Right.
The last project that Arturo works on.
So this is sort of Arturo's work, and this is the building that we've been looking at sites since September, really, August, September. This was considered, but it's really tough installation, and just in case anyone's not aware, these big blank walls are flood walls, and we can't bolt into them. So that turned out to be a bit of an issue. So we started looking at the back of the building, the side of the building, where the Piney Branch kids come in, and there's a structural problem with this, which is where we wanted to put it. It's probably a veneer and it's cracking, so we thought that was probably not a good idea. This is the site. The library wall was suggested to us, and we've thought about it and like it, and great reaction from the community. I haven't heard one person say no. So we're really thinking of a nature theme. Trees, leaves, water, just some different, we're looking at materials right now because we're still getting things donated, and the materials actually are going to determine some of the design, what color we get. We just got a bunch of glass today, so it will make a difference. You can see sort of what we're dealing with. We don't want the project to get lost, but this is a great visibility coming down 410. We would like to be able to do that edge by the generator, that green generator, to kind of camouflage it a little bit.
Or at least tie it in a bit.
Tie it in a bit. We would love to do that sort of crescent shape up here. And we think that's probably good for now.
And the doorway.
Oh, I'll get there.
Okay.
You can see how it really makes a difference to kind of just add those few other little elements, so it's not, we're looking at tying things together. Someday, we would love to do something on that wall. It's really an obvious place, and I think you can see the difference that it makes by putting something there. If we want to do mosaic there like phase 2, it's a possibility, but we would have to build a structure that's not bolted into the wall. It is possible, but it's phase 2. A green wall, a living wall. There are people who are interested in doing a fundraiser to do something like that, but it does involve irrigation. It might not happen right now. This could happen. This would be, we talked with Deborah Heidevan at the rec department, and she said the graffiti wall is something she's been wanting to do for a very long time. And if we stretch canvas on a board, that's it. I mean, it's inexpensive. It's something we could do right away. We all really liked your idea that it could change. You know, it doesn't have to be really permanent. It can sort of change, you know, as it has a little wear, you get another crew in to do another. Alice has been speaking with a horticulturist who is interested in just helping with potted vines that come down over the sides. So all of that is, these are a possibility, pretty realistic. Also, Alice mentioned, in addition to that, the doorways. We talked to the ESOL kids about, what does this say? Is this like welcome or something else? I forget, because
One of them says beloved, which is so nice. It's kind of a cross between loving and beloved.
Yeah.
But basically, words that they think are important: family, community, learning, creating.
Yeah.
In different languages.
So this is the kids get to sort of do different things, and sort of looking at indigenous patterning from their culture of origin, and their ability with words. And we would put those together. There it is.
Loving, yeah.
Be loving.
Another one was Bonjour tout le monde. Good
Yeah.
morning, all the world.
We asked them what would be welcoming words. And also this is a clay workshop, making clay elements with these folks.
That's adults and families.
Adults and families. People are eager to do it again, that we would put together and put around the doorways with maybe like a theme like the vine that kind of ties it all together and ties it in with the nature theme on the front. This is the side door where the kids come in, something like that. Okay, so.
Were there any questions about any parts of this?
We'll find out.
Oh, one thing I wanted to mention, we will use a lot of mirror. Really nice and shiny, and it's impossible to visualize the mirror. You can't tell it's mirror, but there'll be a lot of shiny things going on.
What was the last thing you said?
We want to use Miro that's shiny and reflective. It's a nice part of Mosaic, and it doesn't show up on any present,
Yeah, you can't
any
visualize
presentation that we've given you. But like if you're familiar with the Visionary Museum, they have a whole 3 stories of Miro that's just very sparkly and adds a nice
Questions,
element.
comments? Councilmember Wright.
I love it. Can you redesign the city website for us?
Maybe.
Other questions, comments? Councilmember Stevens.
I love the project. I have to admit, I'm not a real fan of mosaics, but the work that you showed on the slides tonight is just incredible. The work that you did over at Piney Branch Elementary, I've seen that, and it's beautiful.
Thank you.
Waiting to see. I saw you one day working in the art room on Obama's picture, and I was waiting to see that result.
Okay.
It's on the cover of The Voice.
I saw it on the cover of The Voice, but that's not the same as seeing it in real life. But anyways, I really, really excited about this project. I think it's just wonderful the way you've been able to pull the community together and getting everybody working on this project. That's the real benefit of this. It's going to be beautiful to see the walls out there all done like this, but it's the community building factor that's so important. And I appreciate your work and all your hard work to pull this off. And I'm sure there's a lot of work left ahead of you. So if there's anything that we can do to help you, please let us know.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Councilmember Robinson.
It looks great. It looks great.
Thank you.
It reminds me of a trip we took to Greenbelt not so long ago, and they're a building that they use for recreation and arts, and there was a lot of arts on the walls and so forth, and it felt really alive. And so I'm glad to see that kind of sensitivity is becoming a reality here. So thank you.
Thank you.
And I'm glad that people like the idea of the library wall.
They do.
Because I know it was hard coming up with the right spot, and an awful lot of time and effort was put into figuring out various other options. But with the library wall working and the other options for tying into it out there and the doorways, I think it's going to make a real difference. And anything that anybody can come up with for a design that could somehow blend in that generator would be wonderful, because it's green now, but as a green background for something that could be painted on there or whatever it needs to be to tie that in would be great, because that thing just sits there all nice and big and ugly.
Any blue tiles for the generator?
There might be heat issues.
It's just too hot.
Yeah.
They can't paint it, and they need access to it. We've looked into that, though.
Yeah, it's
So-
really tight, because we've even like a lattice or something in front of it, it's very tight space-wise, but it's a possibility, this is a start.
Yeah. But I was thinking, gee, there must be some way of a little bit of paint on it that, gives it its tree or whatever it is
Viney
that comes
look.
in. Yes. Paint on some vines to at least say, we've thought about it, here's a little bit. It doesn't have to be, absolutely 100% covered, but even just a vine and a snake and an apple.
That wouldn't bring on any community.
Thinking outside the box. Any other comments?
I had a
Yeah.
quick question. I heard that there was talk of maybe a graffiti wall.
Yeah.
The director. Wondering what the city council's thoughts on that is.
I have thoughts about it. It's something I've talked with the Recreation Department about in the past. I think it's a fantastic idea. And I see it as, it was mentioned in the presentation, see it as being a temporary thing that there's kind of a revolving graffiti. So you have different members of the community doing the project, and it stay there for a period of time, and then it's replaced with another project done by some of the young people in the community. I think it'd be fantastic. We have a lot of artists that are wasting their energy on signs that we just erase.
And this would probably be on canvas, because that wall also is a flood wall and it's subject to moisture, but if it would be on some sort of canvas, it could either be replaced or gessoed over and repainted. All of those walls down there are subject to moisture because of the flood wall.
Right. And I think it would be a great opportunity for some of the older artists. We've got a lot of young people, elementary school age in this project. I think the graffiti wall would be something that would be very good for the middle school and high school kids.
And everything I've heard about them, I've heard timeframes like a month, and then it's replaced with something else. And so my feeling was, whatever's up there, it'll be gone. Just keep on going, and I think it would be a great opportunity.
I think this wall right out here by Grand Avenue would be a good possibility, because it's something that can be seen from Maple Avenue as you drive down.
Councilmember Clay?
I have suggested several times since I became a council member that we look at the moat wall inside and do a project like we did at my college, where they cordon off a similar wall that they had that they called the Merrill Moat at UC Santa Cruz, and every quarter they would whitewash it, and they would assign a certain amount of space, actually fairly wide, and people would bid on being able to paint them. And so they would paint them, and then every quarter they would bring out the applause meter, and they would save a third of them. And so the 1/3 that got the greatest applause stayed, and then the other ones got whitewashed over and got rebid again. And they did it every 3 months, and it was great. And I would love to do it in the moat in there.
Councilmember Clay, when you say rebid, what does that mean?
Oh, they just had a mechanism for distributing the opportunity.
It wasn't a bidding with money to?
No.
Okay, just checking.
No, in fact, the artists had to pay for the paint that they used to paint it with. It was awesome.
So that sounds like a positive reaction.
Yeah, that's great.
That's awesome.
Anything else? I look forward to the continued interest by the community in this project, and your continued getting us to the first phase of what I hope is a long project.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We're adjourned.
Oh, thank you.